July 1942. The Arctic Ocean. 35 cargo ships carrying war supplies worth hundreds of millions of dollars sailed toward the Soviet Union. Then came 4 words that changed everything. Scatter. Proceed at utmost speed. Within days, 24 ships lay at the bottom of the icy Arctic waters. Over 150 merchant seamen were dead. Thousands of tanks, aircraft, and vehicles lost forever. This was convoy PQ-17, and the decision that destroyed it remains one of the most controversial orders in naval history. What really happened in those frozen waters? And why did the British Admiralty give an order that turned a protected convoy into helpless prey for German forces? The story of PQ-17 begins not in the Arctic, but in the desperate strategic situation of 1942. The Soviet Union was fighting for survival against Nazi Germany. Stalin demanded a second front, but Britain and America weren't ready for a European invasion. Instead, they promised something else: supplies. Massive amounts of war materials shipped through the most dangerous waters on Earth. The Arctic convoys were the lifeline keeping the Soviet war machine alive. These weren't ordinary shipping routes. The journey from Iceland to Arkhangelsk or Murmansk meant sailing through waters where summer brought 24 hours of daylight, making ships visible to enemy aircraft and submarines at all times. Temperatures could drop to -40 degrees. Ice could form on ships so quickly that vessels became top-heavy and capsized. Hypothermia killed within minutes if you went into the water. But the strategic importance outweighed the dangers. Every convoy that made it through delivered tanks that would fight at Stalingrad, aircraft that would defend Moscow, and supplies that would help turn the tide on the Eastern Front. By June 1942, several convoys had already made the run. Some had suffered losses, but most ships got through with heavy naval escorts fighting off German attacks. Then came PQ-17, departing from Iceland on June 27th. 35 merchant ships, 22 of them American, 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, 4 armed trawlers, 2 anti-aircraft ships, and 2 submarines formed the close escort. Further out, covering forces included British cruisers and destroyers. And somewhere beyond that, the home fleet with battleships and an aircraft carrier stood ready to intervene if German surface ships attacked. The convoy carried 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 vehicles, and over 150,000 tons of general cargo. It represented an enormous investment in the Soviet war effort. Captain Jack Broom commanded the destroyer escort. He had experience with Arctic convoys and knew the risks. But the men aboard those merchant ships, many of them American civilians in the merchant marine, had no idea what was coming. For the first few days, things went reasonably well. German reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy, as expected. U-boats began shadowing. On July 2nd, the attack started. German bombers came in waves. The escorts fought them off, shooting down several aircraft. One merchant ship was hit and had to turn back. The convoy's defensive formation held. Guns blazed constantly during the perpetual Arctic daylight. The men were exhausted, but the system was working. Then British naval intelligence received alarming reports. The German battleship Tirpitz, sister ship to the Bismarck, had been spotted moving from her anchorage. She was possibly heading toward the convoy. Tirpitz was a nightmare scenario. If she reached PQ-17, she could destroy the entire convoy and its escorts before the home fleet could intervene. The covering cruisers stood no chance against her 15-inch guns. Admiral Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord and the professional head of the Royal Navy, was monitoring the situation from London. Pound faced a terrible dilemma. If Tirpitz was indeed coming, keeping the convoy together would concentrate targets for her guns. The escorts couldn't stop a battleship, but scattering the convoy would leave individual merchant ships defenseless against U-boats and aircraft. On July 4th, without confirming Tirpitz had actually sailed toward the convoy, Pound made his decision. At 9:11 p.m., a signal went out. Captain Broom couldn't believe what he was reading. Convoy is to scatter. Scatter? That went against every principle of convoy defense. Ships were safer together, with concentrated anti-aircraft fire and anti-submarine protection. He requested confirmation. 4 minutes later came an even more shocking order. The covering cruisers were to withdraw westward at high speed. The close escort was to leave the merchant ships and join the cruisers. PQ-17 was being abandoned. Broom had no choice but to obey. With a heavy heart, he ordered the escorts to leave. The merchant ships watched in disbelief as their protection steamed away. Then they scattered, each ship heading independently towards Soviet ports over 800 miles away. What had been a defended convoy became 35 isolated targets spread across the Arctic Ocean.
The German forces couldn't believe their luck.
U-boats that had been cautiously probing a heavily defended formation now found unescorted merchant ships sailing alone. Bombers that had faced concentrated anti-aircraft fire could now attack single vessels with impunity. The slaughter began immediately. Ship after ship was torpedoed or bombed. Men abandoned vessels and lifeboats and rafts, facing the freezing Arctic waters. Some ships tried to hide in ice fields. Others made desperate runs at full speed. A few fought back with their deck guns, but they were helpless. The American Liberty ship Samuel Chase tried to reach the ice edge. German bombers found her. The crew abandoned ship as she burned. The British merchantman Navarino was torpedoed. Her crew took to lifeboats in waters so cold that ice formed on their clothing. Some ships made it to Novaya Zemlya, a desolate Arctic island, where crews waited for rescue. Others were hunted down one by one across hundreds of miles of ocean. Here's the cruelest irony. Tirpitz never came. She had put to sea briefly, but returned to port before ever threatening the convoy. Admiral Pound had scattered PQ-17 based on the possibility of an attack that never materialized. The order that was supposed to save the convoy from a battleship instead delivered it to U-boats and bombers. The numbers tell the story. Of the 35 merchant ships that scattered, only 11 reached Soviet ports. 24 were sunk. 153 merchant seamen died. The losses in cargo were staggering. 210 aircraft, 430 tanks, 3,350 vehicles, and nearly 100,000 tons of other cargo went to the bottom. It was the worst disaster in the history of the Arctic convoys. The Germans achieved their greatest victory in the Battle of the Atlantic without their battleship firing a single shot. The aftermath was bitter. Merchant seamen felt betrayed. They'd been told the Royal Navy would protect them, and instead, they'd been abandoned. Captain Broom was haunted by the decision for the rest of his life. He'd obeyed orders, but he knew those orders were wrong. Stalin was furious. The Soviets needed those supplies desperately. The disaster strained the alliance at a critical moment. Admiral Pound never fully explained his reasoning. He died in 1943, taking his thoughts to the grave. But analysis of the decision reveals a man under enormous pressure, working with incomplete intelligence, making choices in real time with thousands of lives at stake. He feared the political and strategic consequences of losing a major convoy to Tirpitz more than the tactical consequences of scattering. He was wrong, but his error came from the crushing weight of command in wartime. The Royal Navy held an inquiry. It concluded that Pound acted on the best information available and that the decision, while tragic in outcome, was understandable given the threat assessment. Many historians disagree. They argue that even if Tirpitz was coming, scattering was still the wrong choice. The convoy should have maintained formation and fought. At least then the escorts could have provided some protection. The legacy of PQ-17 changed Arctic convoy operations forever. Never again would a convoy be ordered to scatter. Subsequent convoys went through with powerful escorts and clear rules of engagement. The Arctic convoys continued throughout the war, and most made it through. But the ghost of PQ-17 haunted every convoy commander who followed. The disaster proved that protecting merchant shipping required unwavering commitment. You couldn't abandon ships to save them. For the families of those 153 men who died in the Arctic waters, no explanation could justify the loss. For the crews who survived, many never fully recovered from the trauma of abandonment and the desperate fight for survival. For historians, PQ-17 remains a case study in command decisions under pressure, the fog of war, and the consequences when intelligence and judgment fail. The Arctic Ocean keeps its secrets. The wrecks of those 24 ships still lie in the cold darkness, monuments to courage and catastrophic decision-making. Convoy PQ-17 reminds us that in war, the most dangerous enemies aren't always the ones you can see. Sometimes the greatest threat comes from the orders given by your own side, from decisions made hundreds of miles away by men who thought they were doing the right thing. The sailors of PQ-17 deserved better. They deserved protection. They deserved a fighting chance. Instead, they got 4 words: scatter, proceed at utmost speed. And for 24 ships and 153 men, those words were a death sentence.